Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. Happy spring to all of you in the Northern Hemisphere. Europe has been going off. I think it was the earliest 300K out and back ever this season. So whether that's due to climate change or just some good luck, but that was pretty cool. Launched in Reader Out, went down past Mont Blanc, all the way back up to the Furka and back home. If someone could do that in the Red Bull X Alps, the race would be over in about 4 days. So congratulations there, and hope you're all getting some good spring flying. It's just barely turning on here in Idaho. The skiing's been pretty off the hook in the backcountry, so I've been slow to make the move, to make the switch over. But we've got a World Cup coming up next month in May, and the 25 competition season is certainly on. The Monte Grappa will be starting just as this show drops. My guest today is Christian, aka Serge Durrant. He is over in Austria, but he grew up in Australia, and he is a real-life maverick. Those of you who are fans of Top Gun, Serge was a Top Gun pilot, became one of the youngest in his early 20s, became a very elite part of that force. He's written a very good book about it that he sent me a couple years ago that we discuss a little bit in this show, called Fighter Pilot. And he's been a hang glider for his entire life. He's been a fan of the show for quite some time, so I got to know him a bit before I actually met him in person. And then he supported Paul Guschebauer in the 23 race, which I was, of course, doing the journalism thing for, so he and I ran into each other quite a bit during that race. And the last time I saw him was he was running down from the Cima Tosa after Paul had launched and was making his move towards the Trecime, and I was heading up to do some coverage there. But his paragliding journey had really just begun then. Spent a year with Paul under his tutelage and got into flying, and then decided he was going to get really serious about it and kind of put his sights on this year's Red Bull X Alps, which we get into why that didn't end up happening in this show. But he spent the last year of his paragliding life under the tutelage of Pal Tackett. Went down and did a master class with him in Colombia, and then decided, okay, let's take this to the next level. He was flying an ENB wing and wanted to start competing in the SRS series, which he then won this year. So he had some success there, but really was fighting fear and had a lot of nervousness and fear when it came to flying, and just wanted desperately to get over it and was having trouble with that. So he got together with Pal, and they did a bunch of acro and a tandem glider, and this is his story about how he got over fear and went on to win the SRS series. And incredibly, in just a year's time, he's now flying an Enzo, just flew in the Nationals down in Australia, and will be flying in his first World Cup this May. So this is a rather incredible story about someone who's had an amazing life and has taken his motivation and passion for aviation to paragliding. And we have some really interesting talks here about risk and risk management and getting over fear and the importance of mentorship and flying with people who are better than you are, and just keeping the gas pedal down, I guess is what you would say. But I don't know that I've ever met someone as motivated as Serge. It's really impressive. His dream of competing in the Red Bull X Alps did not happen this year, although certainly could in the future. So we talk about that. Was it a disappointment or just a learning, a step in the learning process? And I really enjoyed this. We had a blast, as all the talks I do. We've been planning this one for a long time, and his travels and my travels have made it very difficult, but we were finally able to sit down in, I think, quite a timely manner with the Red Bull X Alps coming up and Serge's first World Cup coming up, and I'll be over there as well, competing in that one next month. So fun talk, very, very interesting person. Enjoy. Serge, finally. I say that to all the guests. It always takes forever for some reason to line these up, but you travel more than I do. You just come back from Australian Nationals. We were talking about that before we started recording. We will get to that. We've got a ton of ground to cover. I think the last time I saw you in your physical form, you were running down off the Cima Tosa with your buddy. You guys were supporting Paul. That was almost 2 years ago now in the last X Alps, and I was running up to try to get him. Of course, I missed him, but I got the next few people coming through there, and that was a lot of fun. And I know you had a huge smile on your face. That's a pretty fun race, and I understand you applied this year, so we'll talk about some of that. And we've got a lot of ground to cover with your recent months of training with Powell. You've had a really interesting year. So, but before we get to that, the first thing I had to ask you was, what the hell's your real name? Because you sent me this book. It was quite a while back, wasn't it? But this is the longest opener I've ever had, by the way. Jump in here. But you sent me this book. You were a Top Gun pilot down in Australia. It's by Max Serge Tucker, which you can tell me about the play on words there. But it's called Fighter Pilot. It's an awesome book. For those of you listening, I'll have the link up to it in the show notes. But it's pretty hysterical. You're living in Austria, but you're Australian, and I'm assuming that's where your humor comes from. But so let's start there. You've been in aviation since you were young.
Yeah, great to be here, Gavin, after so long. I started flying, I think my first flight, I was 4 years old on my dad's back in a hang glider, and that was back in the days when hang gliding was super dangerous. So that was a Rogello wing that he built himself. My mother divorced him very shortly thereafter, and I think it might have had something to do with that initial flight from my dad's back. And then I took up professional flying when I left home at 17, joined the military straight away, avoided the degree and the officer course and just went straight into flying. So by 21, I was flying jets, and that's when I started hang gliding as well. And I was torn between two loves, the love for the F-18, which, is like no other machine, particularly when you're 21 years old and you get this $100 million machine to, fly around in whenever you want. But I'd race home from work every day if the sea breeze was on, because I lived in a particularly great part of Australia for coastal hang gliding. And I had an apartment on top of a cliff, so I could take off and land right at my own apartment. And I'd fly into the night, till 9, 10 o'clock at night in the dark with Siloom sticks in the leading edge, setting off UFO reports, and then try and set the alarm and get up early in the morning to go back to work and do some fighter flying. So it was a fantastic 6 years on the coast there doing that.
So, the obvious question is, I always say that if I'd gotten into this sport when you did, late teens, well, you got into it when you were 4 on your dad's back, but definitely wouldn't have seen my 25th birthday. And from the book, you guys are all, you're top guns, right? You've got unbelievable confidence, but you're young and you're dumb. You're smarter than most, but because you're flying these airplanes, but that kind of rocket ship between your legs cannot be that safe. In fact, there's some really horrible tragedies in your book as well. Good friends, but how did you survive? You're doing that for a job and you're hang gliding. How did you make it?
I don't know. It might have a bit to do with why I am I try to be a good Christian, and I do believe in a God and things like that. That might actually have shaped my belief system, the fact that I got here and got this far. In hang gliding, the funny thing was I was quite crazy on the hang glider, and I only ever bent 2 uprights and never didn't break a finger or anything, which is really quite remarkable. At the same time, I had a mate fly into high tension power lines, blew both his legs off and both his arms instantaneously. So, we did we were really pushing the boundaries. I made my own car towing system, designed my own trolley. We were the first to do that. And I nearly killed my best mate on the first tow on that. So we were really at the cutting edge of moving inland and doing it in a way where we didn't have any mountains to jump off. And that was pretty fraught at the time. On the flying side, it's a very unique environment because it's heavily regulated, but not in the sense that the commercial airlines are, where you have books and rules and regs. It's done very much through a leadership mentor model. So you've got a wingman all the time. When you're junior, you're the wingman of someone who's very experienced, who's watching out for you. As you step up in your experience, you'll take on a junior lead, where you'll have a very experienced wingman and you're a junior lead, and then you'll work your way right up until you're what we call an ACAT, which is qualified to lead the entire Air Force to war. That categorization from E, D, C up to A takes you about 10 years, maybe a little bit longer to get up to ACAT. And it's incredibly competitive, and it teaches you to learn fast, and you have to learn fast or you get left behind. In fact, you won't even get through the flying school. Each hour is $120,000 an hour. The last course I did was 6 months long and $25 million to train me alone. I did it with 5 other friends, 6 of us, $25 million each. So they can't afford guys who aren't progressing fast enough. So it's incredibly competitive. And I mean, if you want to talk about a swinging dick environment, it was like that every single day. And I mean, the recent Top Gun movie, Top Gun #2, I actually took all my paragliding friends to the cinema here in Salzburg. About 20 of us went. We had dinner. We all watched it together. It was a bloody good night. But they really got that sort of camaraderie pretty good, in that it's so competitive. And that competitiveness, just like you with your paraglider racing, the more competitive, the better you get. It's like that on day and night. We were doing 80-hour weeks. It's pretty much a typical week at work is 80 hours consistently for my whole career. And we're competitive on the ground and we're competitive in the air. And it's a very, some people don't like it and they, naturally drop out. But the guys who thrive in that environment, they absolutely love it. So it really gets you to push the boundaries. And to come back to your question about why I didn't kill myself, I think it's because that mentoring program, some of the guys I flew with were just incredible human beings. And in many ways, I mean, I would say their speed of mind, reflexes, all of those sort of things you'd think of as a fighter pilot, but then also just the ability to lead a young man. And I mean, I remember I got pulled into, he was my best friend and my boss, and I taught him to hang glide, and he subsequently died. And that's who I dedicated the book to, JP. And I remember he pulled me into his office, and I'd done something dumb in the jet, flown low and killed a cow or something like that. I don't remember what the situation was, but it was something that was not authorized. He called me into the office and he said, anyone else I'd probably ground for that and ruin their career, but you've got some real talent and I need to learn how to channel it. So I'm taking that on board as a challenge for me, is what he said to himself. So he took me on as a problem child, and he had to walk this very fine line of training someone who, when they pick up the phone and say, hey, you need to go into danger at the speed of sound at 100 feet full of bombs and see if you can get back alive, who are willing to do that without asking any questions, but also during the training peacetime environment, not end up as a smoking hole in the ground. And, as you said, Gavin, I buried 5 really good mates in my career who made some bad decisions. And those decisions, I mean, just to put it into perspective, when we're doing one particular maneuver called low altitude training, we are at very low altitude, we pull up, we roll inverted, we pull down at high G into the ground and then try and miss the ground. Sounds really simple, but if we are more than 1.5 seconds...
Doesn't sound that simple.
We have a 1.5 second tolerance. So if we don't put the input in, if we're 1.5 seconds late, we're a smoking hole. So when you're working to those sort of tolerances with your inputs, you don't have room for people who aren't progressing fast. And that's what I mean about that mentoring program that we did. And probably when we get on to Pal Tucker, it's probably why I hold him in such high esteem, is because he has a lot of those sort of skills naturally, is what I found in the year I did with him, in that he was pushing me. And as I've said to others, the year I did with Pal was far more dangerous and far more exhausting, and it was very brutal. It was the hardest year of my flying career, the year I did with Pal Tucker. But we achieved some amazing. We achieved some amazing goals in it. But it was because he was pushing me so hard, and he has a really good ability to push hard, but right to the edge of where the risk is no longer acceptable. And I've got many examples of where Pal pushed me, and I didn't feel comfortable. but he ended up being right and I was wrong. I'm quite a conservative pilot, naturally, particularly on the paraglider. Hang glider I'm more aggressive on, or an aerobatic aircraft these days, or whatever else I fly. I'm pretty much, I'll fly them as hard as I can. But on a paraglider, I'm much more conservative. I'm checking everything twice, 3 times pre-takeoff. In flight, guys will push really deep. Maybe they haven't got a really good landing area. They feel good they're going to get a thermal and get out of that valley. I'll sort of go, I'm going to skip that one. So I consider myself relatively conservative in my decision making compared to other guys. Pal is very aggressive, but he was very right on every occasion. Even on one occasion where I lost control quite badly, and he was right. I was able to get myself out of it at low level on an Enzo, and his assessment of my ability was better than my own personal assessment. And as a guy with, I don't know how many years I've got flying now. I've got about 37 years of professional flying. I'm pretty good at understanding where my limits are and things like that because I've been doing it for so long. So I found that really refreshing to find someone like Pal in the paragliding community who hasn't been through Top Gun and all the professional instructional schools and things that I went through, who is able to do that. And I've flown with Pal and many of his students, maybe 20 of his other students in gaggle flying, watched him do it with everyone flying from A-wings to Enzos, and I've seen his ability to read a wing, up to a kilometre or two away, visually determine whether that person's got that wing under control and whether that day is suitable for them and make some really good judgment calls. So, yeah, he has that innate mentor mindset, and that's really how he got me through that year, just like I was when I was on jets pushing the limit. And it wasn't done because we had yes, there was rules, but the rules can be broken, and what you rely on is really good wingmen to look over their shoulder, keep their eye on you, and keep you safe.
Your commander that kind of took you under his wing that, and normally would have just said, you're out of here for that mistake, that there's some parallels there to Maverick, the first film. I mean, I know there's a lot of Hollywood in the film, the Top Gun film and the second one, but how much of that can, for those of us who have just seen the films, have no idea what that life and that world are really like? I mean, do you see some characteristics in who Tom Cruise was playing in yourself?
Look,
that's a stretch.
I mean, Top Gun 1 came out when I was in high school, and obviously it was incredibly motivating, and it was only, I left high school literally on the Friday and Monday joined the military, so, I was straight in. It was a very motivating film, but, I don't want to get anyone misled there. There's a ton of discipline. They don't tolerate fools very well at all. The one advantage I had is I was performing, and that gave me a little more leeway, whereas I think some other guys, if they'd done some of the things I've done, probably would have been given the arse.
Okay. So you were learning fast. You were pushing it, but pushing in the right ways.
Look, at 24 years of age, I won the Fighter Pilot of the Year. We only have 60 in Australia, and they gave me the number one. It's an award they give every year. So at 24 years of age, one of the youngest in Australia, I won that award.
Wow.
And so I was working really hard and getting good results. And that work wasn't just in the air. It's, we have a ratio of about 10 hours to 1 hour flying, 10 on the ground in preparation and debrief for every hour in the air. You do 2 flights a day, it's going to be somewhere like an 18-hour day. Yeah. We were doing 3 when I was at the Top Gun school and instructing there. We would stay in the cockpit, change students, refuel with one engine running, bang up for another hop, jump another student in, keep the jet running on one, like 3 in a row. And you'd be just in their 8G missions, just absolutely shattered by the end of the day. I think on the ground is I really partied hard in my 20s, never during the week. So we just had a no alcohol policy at work. But come Friday, with all of that workload and being a young, 21-year-old guy with all that workload, it all came out pretty hard on a Friday night, and maybe right through to the Saturday and the Sunday as well. So it was pretty.
Well, you got to live up to your Aussie reputation.
Well, there was just a shit ton of pressure through the week. There was no, you literally your life was on the line. You were pushing yourself to the edge of your mental, psychological, and physical boundaries constantly from Monday at 6 in the morning through till Friday at 5 in the afternoon. And on
Mm.
Friday at 5 in the afternoon, there was a bit of a blowout, which I think actually was quite therapeutic in a way.
You've maybe heard the stories about our parties over here on this side of the pond after our comps, after our nationals, after the Wide Open and the one in Chelan, and then now my other comp, the X Red Rocks. And it's really become a big part of our community. And it's been really interesting. One of the things we always talk about that makes it kind of so unique and also just such a blowout is, you're spending a pretty intense week with these folks. And, we're all racing, but we've all got egos. We all care about each other. I mean, it's not high stakes at all, like what you're talking about, what you were doing defending Australia, but it's, you're risking your life. You're pressing a lot of bar. You're flying over deep terrain and you're trying to beat your friends. And then you get to all come together and have a hug and have a good party. And it is quite therapeutic. It's really nice.
I think that's really important that you said that, Gavin, because a lot of my paragliding friends, they say to me, "Oh, why do you paraglide? You've flown all these other aircraft," and I still do. And the paraglider is such a lovely thing, and I don't think they fully appreciate exactly what you just said. I mean, I've been shot at in 3 different countries in aircraft, shot down once. I had an accident in an aircraft in Australia. I've had all these things happen in aviation, and none of them are at a level of what some of my paragliding experiences have been.
That's wild.
So if you get yourself on the lee side of the main ridge of the Alps, and you're trying to do some lee side flying, which I had a really couple of bad days with Pal there, it's just absolutely horrifying, where you're just trying to keep the wing open, knowing that only 50 meters below you is a rock face, and you can't really afford for that wing to even fold up. You're not really going to be able to recover it. So yeah, I think the last year, like I said, I'm not exaggerating when I say it was the toughest year of training. Even tougher than my Top Gun course. I mean, I did not find my Top Gun course that hard, to be honest.
That's what I mean. How has all those years of being a Top Gun pilot and the discipline, the passion, the hours, the camaraderie, all the things that go into becoming such a high level pilot, just in aviation, how did that bridge to how you've approached flying rags? How did that? I imagine that would have a huge impact. We do have a lot of commercial pilots in this game, and they're always talking about the need that we have in paragliding to have more check boxes and systems and have it be more systematic. Paragliding is incredibly loose. It depends on who you learn it from and where you learn it from. And, here's your license, go off, have fun, but, good luck. There's a lot of good luck, and hopefully we make cheap mistakes. You're not allowed to do that because you can't crash $100 million plane. They want to, like you said, you don't want to be a hole in the ground. I imagine that would have been a great history to bring to your free flight aviation.
Look, I think,
or not, or was it a hindrance in a sense?
Well, I think it was a hindrance. That's a really good point.
Wow.
I think it was a hindrance in terms of risk management. I think it held me back quite a long way. A lot. It held me back for a couple of years because I was applying, that professional pilot commercial aviation thing to it, and it's actually not what's needed. And that took me a while to sort of unlearn that. What did help, though, Gavin, was how to learn fast. So particularly when I started training with Paul Guschelbauer in 23 and then Pal in 24, we only had 2 years to hit some pretty big goals. And I was fast on the ground and I was slow in the air. That was my summary of hike and fly, of how I was. I'm still pretty fast on my legs. And but I wasn't fast at all in the air. And so that's what I was really focusing on. And Pell put this very aggressive plan together. But in order to learn fast, I think in the last 20 years, even since I was instructing at the school on the F-18, we've really learned a lot of, in the neuroscience of how the human mind works and how you can optimize it. So things like grit, which requires passion plus perseverance. It's going to be really hard to be a good paraglider pilot if you don't have some grit. You've got to find that grit. You've got to have a good reason for why you do this sport. If it's because you just like watching people float around, that's great. And I'll go for a hike and fly with you every Sunday morning when the weather's absolutely perfect. If you want to go and win the super final, you're going to have some grit, because you're going to have to get through some really tough blockages in the mind at different stages through your progression, whatever they might be. And I'm sure you've had them I know you have. I've heard your podcast, Gavin, and we all have them. In order to get through those mental barriers, you've got to be able to dig deep. And so you've got to have that reason d'entrée for why you're doing it. And that's what I say to people. You've got to find a really good reason to have it. Once you've found that, that should give you the passion, and it should give you the perseverance to get through those difficult patches. And then you've got a whole bunch of other neuroscientific things that we've now learnt on how to learn. We learn through extraction, not by insertion. So when you read a book, you're putting it into your brain. That's not how you memorize it. You memorize it by getting out of the brain. So you've got to read it, and then you've got to extract it. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. I would say we were very good at that, but I would also say the last 20 years, we've got even better generally as humans in understanding the human mind. And there's some really good reading that I can recommend to people. I'll give you a list of some. I've got about 8 very good books on how you can learn fast. And I think, when I met Pal at the start of it was the end of 23, I was on a B wing, and a year later he had me on the Enzo, and I was racing it. So that was really fast progression, and it wasn't done through being a maverick or anything like that. Like I said, Pal is, if one thing he's very conservative with, is pushing his clients too fast, because he's had clients have accidents, and it really, no one wants that with a client. Okay. Pal takes a lot of care of his clients. But I remember turning up to Brazil, November 23, and my first two-liner was on a photon on a tow in Brazil with 35 kilometre an hour wind with thermals, and I'd never done any of those things before. That was my first flight on a two-liner. And we were straight into it. And each day was, 100, 200, 300, 400. It was an amazing 2 weeks that we had in Brazil. And that was my first go on a two-liner. So learning fast, I think, is probably the most important thing that I was able to bring across from the fighter community. As I said, they can't afford people who learn slow, so they teach you some very good techniques of how to progress fast. That helped me over the last couple of years move very fast through the progression on the paraglider. The other thing I think,
is there much? Let me cut in real quickly. Is there much more to that than just working your ass off?
Yeah, it's actually not just about. It's not just about effort at all. It's learning smartly. So often, look, here's one simple one is when you have a setback, okay, and you have something bad. Maybe you have a really bad landing. Maybe you land in a tree, and you go, well, that wasn't part of my plan for today. Okay, now that can really spook some people, and it can set you back. You call them fear injuries. I think it's a great term. Mm-hmm. One of the key areas we've learnt is in the neuroscientific area is how people think about that trauma. If you think about that in a negative way, like, oh, I'm a hopeless pilot, I nearly killed myself, it might happen tomorrow, it's going to directly relate to how you perform today. If you think,
I can't do
you're
this,
get that negative self-talk.
The negative
self-talk. Yeah. Whereas if you take it as, firstly, you've got to do a very good root cause analysis of that issue. And it doesn't have to be anything as major as landing in a tree. Like I say to people, you should have goals. Yeah. Part of that learning fast is being very good about goal setting. So even if it's just a morning sled ride in winter here, I have a diary. I have a paragliding diary.
Every flight's a training flight. Yeah. Every flight's an opportunity to learn. I have particular goals that I'm writing out. So my last flight was 2 days ago. It was cold, a little bit ferny, actually quite a bit ferny. And one of my goals was land within 5 meters of my designated spot. Yeah. So even if it's just a sled ride, I'm setting specific goals all the way along. And then I'm analysing, okay, well, I landed 15 short. Why? Because you didn't assess the headwind on landing. Why?
what were your wind indicators? Oh, shit, I wasn't even looking for them. I was half asleep. Well, you idiot, there was water on the lake. There was fires in Austria in winter. There was leaves on the... Oh, la, la. Okay, so lesson learnt, be more alert. How do you get more alert? Well, 10 minutes before landing, suck on some Gatorade, okay, do some square breathing, oxygenate your brain, and start looking for wind indicators. So whatever it is, great, write it down. I've got my lesson learned. So even on the most basic sled ride, which isn't like a comp flight or something like that, you can draw so much out. And why that's important is because the biggest failures you have can be your greatest learning lessons if you treat it that way. And then actually what you're actually seeking is those big lessons that you want to learn. Now, you don't want to hurt yourself, right? But you do want to have, like the one I was telling you about in Australia. You know, I had this demon following me around on the paraglider since I started flying it. And I can't tell you how bad it was. In fact, I will tell you. I had this fear of the wing fault.
Wait, started flying that glider or just
full stop,
flying paragliders?
So when I met with Pal, and I said, look, I want you to teach me how to fly fast. We sat down, we had a meeting, we had a couple of meetings about it, and Pal took it under a lot of consideration about where I was and where my goals were. And my goals were to make XLPs within 2 years, which is obviously a very big goal, and particularly when I was on a B wing, right? So some would say that's quite ridiculous, yeah, to say that. But
just rewind a little bit further. How did you choose? Because you were working with Paul. Yeah, that's when we started chatting together, and you were his supporter in the XLPs. That was obviously because you had your eyes on maybe doing the race back then. But how did you choose Pal?
Okay. So the point we were talking about was fear injuries and how we get over them. And I was going to talk about my fear and how Pal helped me get over it.
Yeah.
I chose Pal because of his speed in flying. So, you know, I like to watch live a lot of the PWC races, and you can learn styles. It's hard to learn them if you're not flying with them. But I'd also, I'd done an XC masterclass down in Colombia with Pal. And I could see this level, this massive level in difference, even with other good pilots around, of how he moved through the sky. It was like he was in a totally different league. And so I approached him and said, look, and I think also when I was supporting Paul Guschelbauer for the XLPs, I mean, you're on the tracker 24 hours a day, and I'm watching the different guys move through the Alps. And I could see the guys who were at that really high PWC level had a distinct advantage. Yeah, the guys who were at that level. So I approached Pal, and he said, yep, okay. And we sort of went through where I'm at, and I told him where I was at, which was very basic, including this seriously bad fear with this demon that was sitting on, over the back of my shoulder, chasing me everywhere that I flew in a paraglider. So I'd had, 30 years of hang gliding, and I don't have any fear on a hang glider, and I still hang glide, and I drag it out and throw it inside out and love it, yeah? Don't have any fear. Even if I haven't flown it for 2 years, I'll jump in it and turn it inside out. The paraglider was a really different kettle of fish for me. And he said, all right, we'll fix that. We'll fix your fear. We'll go for a tandem flight, and we'll do some SIV at Görlitz.
What? Where was it? Where was the bad guy in your shoulder coming from? Do you know? Why did you have that fear? Had you had a bad incident, or was it just...
No, I hadn't had a bad...
Flying something that collapsed, okay.
I'd done an SIV with Jockey down in Turkey, and I just, it's sort of, it's these horror stories that you hear from people, the wing folds up, you're close to the Alps, and bang, you're in.
Okay.
So this thing was haunting me, Gavin, and occupying my mind. So instead of flying around looking for leaf litter, bugs, shimmering leaves, and finding thermals, I'm just flying around scared of my own wing. So Pal said, look, we'll fix that. I've had students like that before. We'll go and do one flight on the tandem, and we'll get that knocked over. So we went to Görlitz, and we jumped on the tandem. We put it into a backfly. He said, okay, it's yours. I backflew it. We came out of it. We did a couple more. He said, okay, you're right to go now by yourself. I said, mate, no way. I think I'm more scared than ever now. This is bloody crazy. He said, all right, we'll go do another one. We did another one. We did another one. We did 3 runs that day. I said, and I'm more scared. I said, this is terrible. We did 3 days of this. So what he said would just be 1 run and maybe 3 or 4 stalls.
God.
We're on 3 days, 4 runs a day, and I am freaking getting worse and not better. And he said, look, you're ready to go. You're handling it well, but it wasn't about the handling. It was the mental aspect. In my mind, I was on the verge of not handling it well, and I just couldn't get over this barrier. Anyway, I woke up on day 4, and I said to myself, you're an absolute pussy. You need to get over it. And I said that to Pell, like he had the tandem there. I said, no, I'm going to go by myself today. He said, oh, what happened? And I said, I don't know. I think I've just got to grow up and change my mindset. So I took the Sea Wing up, and since that day, I do SIV here over my own lake here in Austria by myself, and I don't have any fear of it really anymore. But the fear I had, so come back. So I'm happy to go doing SIV by myself now, and that was a great inclusion. We just started that early on in the progression with Pal, and it really got the mindset. And I'll tell you how good it was, Gavin. I did Wednesday, Thursday, Friday with Pal. I raced Saturday in the board air race, and I got 7th outright, won the Masters division. It was the best result I'd had. And all it was the mind wasn't in panic mode. I was actually flying properly for the first time.
Let's drill into that just a little bit. So you do the 3 or 4 days with Pal on the tandem, and you're doing multiple runs, and it's not helping. And then you have this kind of self-talk.
Yeah.
Listen, man, come on, get over this. What exactly was it? Is it because Jeff Shapiro talks about that we've got, all it is this irrational fear that's bouncing around between our ears. So we just got to go in there and get rid of it.
I think it is irrational. And I say that as, I was the risk manager at Emirates Airlines, okay? The biggest airline in the world. And I'm pretty good at risk management. So I know all the numbers and I know all the stats. And what I was fearing was totally irrational. So it was a racing mind, out of control, emotional response. Yeah. It wasn't rational. And how I fixed it, and I still do it sometimes now if I get it, if there's a particularly bad day, is I've worked a lot in war zones, okay, and like about a dozen of them. And there's times in those moments where you have to do things which are incredibly scary, and you just have to grit your teeth and do it. And I've heard you use the term XELPS is like going to war. And when I first, do you remember saying that, Gavin?
Oh, yeah.
When you said that first time, I went, in my mind, I wonder if Gavin's actually been to war. But now that actually is a method that I use, is like, okay, it's incredibly rough today. You're on the edge of losing control of the wing. Grit your teeth and get into this now and do it. So in the same way where you might be in a conflict zone and you have to do something to live, to get through it, it's the same mentality that I use now. A bit of breathing sometimes to calm myself down or whatever. But I haven't. The last bad sort of moment I had like that was, I think, September last year, which was on the main spine of the Alps. Pal and I were deliberately doing some lee side flying on the main spine. I was getting my ass handed to me. Okay, seriously bad. And we landed, and I said, "Are you serious?" And he said, "Serge, that's a 7. XELPS 23 was 11 out of 10. You just flew a 7. I said, "Oh, you've got to be shitting me." This is, and we went up and did it the second day, same conditions, and I had the same result. And I found those 2 days really hard to get my mind over it. And I actually considered quitting the sport after those 2 days. That was September last year. Yeah. It was that rough and violent. But then, and I think a bit had to do with when we lost Timo last year. Pal and I were there with the French. We raced day 1 with them. We jumped into their race, and so we were there when the prang happened, and that Maxime was there, and all the guys were obviously very upset. I didn't know Timo, but the circumstances in which he had his accident is something that I have had concerns about, which is flying below my reserve height, full bar near a cliff. Okay, I don't. In fact, below 150 meters. So I use on my Vario, I have 150 meters set AGL. That's what I know. I can put my wing into a back fly, clear it, get out and keep flying. So if I'm below 150, I'm not going to try and get the wing out. If it goes crazy, I'm going to go for an instantaneous reserve throw. And I've been using those numbers, and that's one of the reasons why I think I'm a lot more conservative, because I've been in races and I've lost positions where guys are, I can see their shadow. They're freaking 6 feet on the cliff, and I've seen their leading edge tuck, and then come off bar and watch the pod shadow come right underneath the pod, and I'm like, oh man, why? I'm 150 meters and I'm in 10th place. I'm quite happy to finish in 10th place in this race and not be doing that to myself, And I think, the risk management is one of the things that has held me back, like I said to you before. But the learning fast has certainly helped me bringing that across from fighters. And the other one I would say, Gavin, is just when you're flying, things like navigation, weather, communication. Like I don't have to think about those because I've been doing them for a long time.
That's really
so that does free the mind up. But on the fear one, I still had this demon sitting behind me. So, okay, I've been doing some good SIV by myself on the C wing, and then I moved to the Enzo. And I've got this fear on the Enzo because of the aspect ratio that the tip's going to go under, wrap around the A's. It's going to be a big bag, and we're going to go into this death spiral, and I'll be unconscious, won't get my reserve out. Okay, so this is in the back of my mind. And at the Nationals in Australia, we had some really hot conditions there. So it was 39 degrees Celsius every day. I'm sorry, I don't know what that is in your
That's
gauge.
just hot. That's just bloody really hot. And bloody hot.
And guys who'd been doing those Nationals, it was my first Nationals. I've not flown much in Australia. But there was guys there who'd done it 10, 15 years saying it was the strongest conditions. You know, we were getting constant +8 thermals and spikes of us up to +20.
Jeez.
Multiple collapses, reserves getting thrown and things like that. And sure enough, pre-start, I'm at cloud base. I'm just dominating the gaggle and I'm ready for, we're just a few minutes before start. And I just get a bit of a beep, beep, beep up to cloud base. Bang, the left wing comes under, wraps around the A's, and within 180 degrees upturn, I'm full downplaning with max G on the wing. I took one look at the reserve handle. I obviously had lots of altitude, and I said, no, I'll get this thing out. So I back flew the Enzo out, cleared the tips, flew, great start, and actually had a good race. And that was the demon that had been haunting me. And actually it ended up, I was in a sub with 2 reserves and all of those other levels of redundancy and didn't need to use any of them. Actually, I was able to do it just through some SIV. And that was sort of the last demon. Now, that doesn't mean I don't go flying and still get scared. I do. But what I'm saying, it's not debilitating now. So I'm going to come back to the main lesson learned for me. If I knew what I knew now and I started this sport, so I did my course in 2018. I'd put it down until COVID, didn't touch the wing. In COVID, I started flying, just doing basic hike and flies. Then 23 was solid training with Paul and 24 solid with Pal. So really 2 years of solid training. But if I knew now, I would do what we did in the military. So we never let a guy go solo in an aeroplane in the military unless he can spin it and get it out or stall it and get it out. But in paragliding, we do it another way. You do your 40 high flights, then you go flying, and if you want, you can go thermaling, do whatever you want, and you can spin it and you can stall it, and you don't know how to get it out. So if I knew what I knew now, I would do my high flights and I would immediately go and do SIV until I could do it with my eyes shut. And then I would start going cross-country instead of the way I did do it, which was a couple of years of cross-country before I was really feeling comfortable with the wing being out of control.
I've got several things I need to ask you because you covered a lot of ground there, but I wanted to start with the 2 days you flew with Powell that were pretty freaky, that were in the lead, that he said were a 7 and, in the X-Ups in 23. The spectators all saw a race that had unbelievably good weather, right? You and I were out there on those days where Maxime landed and he was kind of in tears and he was landing backwards and, it was peaking over 60K an hour going through the Lakes District by Bellinzona. These were not recreational paragliding days. I mean, it was incredibly windy and very sketchy. I'm sure Pal talked about this with you. If I had gone flying with you guys those 2 days, I probably would have felt pretty similarly because you're not in the race. There's a very different place you get in your head. I'm just wondering what Pal said about that because he's got this incredibly long acro background. And so for a lot of us who have been flying XC for a long time can look at that and go, he's definitely got an advantage because he's got this incredible gift of recovery. He knows what the wing's going to do before it does it more than most. And just this ability, and that translates to all kinds of skills on the ground, launching, landing, top landing, that's given him a huge advantage all those years training really hard acro, the kind of training you've been doing the last 2 years, but for years for acro as a competitive acro pilot and all the films and master acro and everything else. But I would imagine even Pal on a 10 out of 10 day when you're just flying, is different than on a 10 out of 10 day in the X Alps. If at least for me, the second that gun goes off in that race, it's pretty hard to get me scared until and then the next day after the race, I go out in conditions that were 70% of what they were. I just flown the day before and I'm shit scared. It's just interesting. Your mind goes to a place while when you're in the zone like that, you're in the zone. And it's this combination of all the factors of going to war, right? You're in it. You got to perform. You got to do it. You don't have any time to think about that shit. You don't have any time to think about, now, man, I'm scared. This sucks. It does. You can think like, wow, this sucks. I've been in a lot of situations in the X Alps where I'm going, man, I'd like this to be different, but that's different than being scared. It's interesting. I don't know how, in all the times I've trained for my 4 campaigns, I could never get there in training ever. I could get close, but I could get current. I could get really fit. I could go flying some nasty stuff, like we hear Kriegel doing all the time. But that switch, I could never find it unless I was in the race.
Yeah. So, what I would say is, firstly, I'm really unhealthily competitive. Let's say that. So if you take me for a training day, Gavin, I'm not going to let you beat me in one thermal or glide 1 foot longer than me, even if it's training, right? So I have and I'm not going to say that's entirely healthy, but that's just how I'm wired. So on that particular day, I'd never experienced the wing move around as violently as it was. Okay, so yes, I've had them wing forward and back and all those sort of things, but this was moving so erratically and so fast. And I felt like I was on the edge of losing the wing. Now, I never lost it. I didn't even lose a tip. But again, in my psychology, I felt like I wasn't up to it. Hal was saying, hey, you've got this. You're managing it well. Let's keep going. We're going to freaking do the whole valley. And in my head, I'm like, dude, I don't think I can make it across the next crossing, right? So it was such a big difference between his observation of me and my perception of me. That's why, the wingman mentor concept, and I really recommend that to a lot of junior pilots, is to go for, okay, I came into the sport with a lot of professional background, a lot of hang gliding and things, but you need to go flying with people who are more experienced than you. And then the people who are more experienced, you're not just there to tell them, hey, it's good for takeoff. You should be watching them in flight, watch them how they're handling the wing. Have you got them into conditions that are a bit too strong for them, in which case go land and have a beer and we can try it again tomorrow. So you should take mentoring as I've got a couple of junior pilots at the moment that I'm working with, and I take it with a lot of responsibility. I'm not going to say I'm good as Pal. He's brilliant at it, in how he can see a wing moving over the top of someone. But I think that those particular conditions on those 2 days we had, they were awful because of how chopped up it was. So strong thermals cut up, which means the wing's really aggressive. Not just strong thermals like we had in Australia, just really very messed up. I was ready to sort of say this sport's not for me, because I think we were in some very difficult conditions that day. And if the wing had gone, there was no way I was going to be able to recover it. We had some good chats about that. I'll also come back to the point you made about X Alps, Gavin. I know 3 of the top guys that finished in the top 15, without mentioning names, and all 3 of them were ready to quit the sport after X Alps 23. They'd all made that decision because of the conditions.
But I don't think is that, in my experience, Serge, I don't think that's that uncommon. I had campaigns in 21, the weather was atrocious, and it was an amazing experience as it always is, but there was some serious self-talk after that one going,
so do you think
this is unreasonable?
In your experience though, Gavin, is it because of the danger of the flying that people have made that decision, or because of the physical exertion where they've gone, I'm not going to do another exercise?
Oh, 0, 100 and 0. The physical is, I've loved all of that. That's never been an issue. I mean, in 2015, there was serious pain because I didn't feed myself right, and that's a whole other story. But no, I don't mean it in any way the discomfort or the pain or that side of that. To me has been awesome. I've loved that part of it. No, it's just the pure absurdity of the risk.
Yeah.
Like you're talking about that 7 out of 10 flight. There are days that, in 2015, there were multiple days, all day like that, and Toma got his face torn off, and Tom Dorado broke his arm and got helicoptered out, and Michael Gebert quit the race. Michael Vici went in the lake, throwing his reserve. He's one of the best comp pilots in the world. It was just ridiculous how much wind we were flying in. And so, yeah, no, it's that. But again, for me, during that race in 2015, it was great. It was it was just incredible. But the day after, if you'd asked me to go back into St. Moritz and fly what I did down to Bellinzona, there was no way. I don't think I could have done it. It's interesting. It's just where your head gets because of the race and just all the things that go into it. I don't know.
Yeah. So we spoke at the start of this call about grit and the ability for passion and perseverance. And, if you've got it, have you got the grit to race? And obviously when you're racing, you've got more grit, right? Because the stakes are higher. You've trained harder for it. You're super passionate. You're perseverance. You're just going to run until your feet fall off, right? If you have to, if it's a rainy day. So you do have that. When it's training, we often can lose that. And I guess that's a bit about the point I was making, when I got to the end of the SRS season and there was some guys who were, having a bit of a sledge having a bit of a go at me in the landing field about, oh, well, if you've got a coach like Powell and if you've got the right gear and if you've got the money, you can win the SRS, without any idea of where I'd started the year with Powell, which I was just absolutely shit scared of a flexible wing, and that's why I say it was the most difficult thing I've ever done. Is the flying was probably as technical, in terms of the feel of the wing and how you handle a wing is probably, that's probably on par with flying an F-18 well. You've got to have skill and you've got to learn to fly it well. But the psychology doesn't come close. You got an ejection seat in an F-18, right? Pull the handle and then you're under your reserve. The paraglider and the proximity to the ground is it's next level when you're in those sort of conditions like we were just talking about.
Amazing. I'm curious, a couple things. When you first approached Powell, was it, hey, this is where I want to be in a year? Did you just say, this is my goal, I want to get in the X-Alps, and he created this whole program? Or did you guys kind of fiddle fart around in the beginning and then he realized what he had in a client and went, okay, you'll take as much punishment as I can throw at you. This is going to be really hard. What was it, chicken or the egg here? What happened?
Powell, one of his great traits, he's a very honest person. In fact, he put up a post at the end of the SRS when I'd won, and he spoke about the year. He sort of described it, and he actually got some real heat from different people about that post, because in that post he mentioned, in one year he took me from a B wing to an Enzo, and again there was no understanding what that entailed. That was more than 250 hours of competition flying together.
Wow.
On the radio, team flying. So
250 hours of comp flying in a year? That's amazing.
Yeah, of comp flying and comp preparation flying. So we'll go here and do a week of comp prep and some training, and then we'll race and things like that. Yeah. So at the start, in fact, when he put that post up, Gavin, he said, I thought I'd met a guy who was having a midlife crisis because of my age, and I understand that. And so he was a little bit hesitant at the start, like, what's up with this 50-year-old guy who's, punishing himself this way? But then he got to know me and he got to know my background, and I've done a lot of competitive sports, and, like ocean racing and sailing and triathlon, Ironman, things like this. So it's always been a part of my life since I was a teenager. And I don't see myself stopping. Obviously, as you get older, you have to calm it down a bit. You can't be as hard on yourself. But he got to know me, and as I said, we'd already done a 1-week masterclass, and he actually, I'll tell you that. There's a funny story behind that. So I turn up in Colombia for the first time, and I am super pumped, right? Like, I'm going to go and do this masterclass. Now, this is before I've set any goals for X-Alps or anything. I'm just going to learn how to fly cross country. So at this stage, my biggest flight I'd ever think I'd done was like a 120 down at Bassano or something like that. Don't really know what I'm doing, but Pal Tuckett seems to have a good background. I'll go and learn from this guy. So I get there, and I'm sitting there in the pre-brief with my diary, making all the notes, and he picked up on it straight away that I was taking it.
Serious.
I was a different. Yeah, I wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't drinking at night. Not that I don't have fun. I mean, anyone who's been on my teams knows I have a lot of fun. But I was really sort of serious. But I'm so serious, Gavin. We get into the first gaggle, right? We launch, and I'm doing the right. No one's going to beat me. And straight away, Pal is he's cloud based. Okay, I'm scratching around at hill height. Like, what's going on here? Clearly I can't thermal. Eventually, I get into the core. And that's it. I'm going to beat everyone. And I keep going and I keep going and I keep going. And now I'm in cloud suck and I'm boom and I'm straight into this big queue. And then I have a collapse and I come out in a spiral through the middle of the gaggle, back out through it. And that was my first day with Pal on my first masterclass. And we got back to the debrief. He said, "Can you please not do that to me again as your instructor?" And so that was his limited exposure to me was that, right? And a bit of flying that week.
Oh, my God. I mean, I'm signing up for this guy for a year of this.
Yeah, right. So he's a bit hesitant, like, what am I doing here? And then he saw I was serious, so we went to Gerlitzen. I started results in hike and fly started to improve, and he could see that I was putting in on the ground and in the air. And then he put the big program together. So once we got the SIV done, we went to Brazil. We went and did big distance. We had a week at Joondalup with ground handling. We sent the SRS as our race campaign, 5 weeks of racing throughout the year, and then different areas of training, generally in the Alps. And Brazil, and just following the weather and following the race circuit. And honestly, I got to October of this year. We had a month in Brazil. It was meant to be a month, and I got to the 2-week mark, and I was just done. I mean, we'd done 1 year together, and now I'm on the Enzo. I'm on the submarine with the Enzo, pushing out by myself across Brazil. Pal's bombed somewhere, and I'm like, I'm exhausted. So I called it. I actually had to go back to work after 2 weeks, which is a bit unfortunate. But it was an amazing journey to be flying across Brazil myself on an Enzo in a submarine a year after we'd done that first tow in Brazil on my first 2-liner. So it was a really amazing
surreal.
Yeah. And I think, I think the big takeaways for me, Gavin, is that the fear of the wing, which I think everybody has, and I'll come back to something else you said. You said, Pell's got an amazing feel and he could see the wing before it moves. I mean, that's one of the things like the difference between doing an SIV recovery and doing acro, huge difference here. So
huge.
SIV recovery, I hear it, I feel, the line goes light, I look up, I make an assessment, I put an input in. When we were doing it together, I mean, he's looking at the internal structure of the wing to see the internal structure change for when he makes his next input. So even before there's no shooting, the wing hasn't moved. It's getting prepared to deflate. So there's a lot of that's why it's so good, actually. He's reading the internals of the wing and seeing the wing's pressure and its next move before it moves. So I think that, that year to go from not even being able to fly a B-wing to get some great results in racing, to actually take out the SRS series, which was a real surprise. I mean, that was a huge surprise, to be honest, because the first SRS race I did was in Colombia at the start of the season, down in January there. And the first race, I came in nearly last because I missed a turn point by 50 metres. I came in second overall, but I'd missed a turn point by 50 metres, so I didn't know how the app worked. I mean, that's how freaking hopeless I was. Apparently it makes a noise and goes, as you hit the turn point, and I'm just following the gaggle around, and then I put the speed bar down, and I came in a good result. But so if I hadn't actually missed that 50 metre, I missed it by 50 metres. If I hadn't done that, I would have taken the first comp in second place overall, but I got 13th overall for that first comp. And then we just kept improving throughout the year. And I think, and then in between the races, we were doing dedicated training. And like I said, it was over 250 hours of race training with Pal in 1 year, which was really heavy load.
I mean, it's, for everybody listening, this is, certainly, for people who get into the sport when they're in their 20s. I mean, this is the dream, right? To go spend a year with one of the most famous pilots in the world and, be led around the sky and have training and feedback. I mean, this isn't a 1 week masterclass that some people get a chance to do. So obviously, an incredible opportunity. You've obviously got the resources to do that, which is terrific. But it leads to the obvious question is why now? I mean, it's interesting. You and I are pretty close in age, I believe. We're not absolutely spring chickens here anymore. Where are you finding the energy for this and the passion for this? It's fascinating.
I don't know the answer to that. That's a really good question, and I've always had it since I was a kid.
Huh.
And I am like still. If you get to know me well, like I'm still quite immature at times when I want to be, and I can be mature at times. So I can balance my maturity with the environment, but I still am like a child with my motivation for my flying, just like I was when I had my first glider flight, my first powered flight, my first jet trainer flight, my first Hornet dual flight, my first solo, and you get those big buzzes and those big rushes. I'll be honest with you, 2 days ago I just did it wasn't really, it was sort of a semi sled ride, ferny, windy, shitty early spring day at my home site. But to me, it was like the most remarkable thing. Like seriously, and it sort of comes back to that point you raised before, Gavin, about I don't think a lot of paraglider pilots truly appreciate how incredibly amazing it is what we do. Like, if you know anything about the Goldilocks zones across the universe, right, where water is between freezing and 100 degrees, with the Webb telescope now, we've looked at all of them, and with AI, we can scan them all, and we found some planets, but there's no atmosphere, etc., etc. So basically, when you hike a hill at the right time of day and you step off onto a bubble of warm rising air, it's the only place in the universe, and you were the only person on the planet that stepped off and got into it, and then you got transported for a couple of 100K across the planet, and then you landed.
That is Goldilocks. That is Goldilocks.
Right?
Yeah,
It's an incredibly unique
stupid
thing that we do. And I'll frame it another way too. If you look over the history of mankind, all right, paragliding is like this absolute tiny, tiny piece at the end but go back to the Neanderthals, all right? We're out there hunting, you and I, and we're, out for a couple of days, and we spear a deer and we're carrying it back to the tribe, and we're exhausted, right? We haven't eaten for days because we been hunting. The tribe's hungry. We finally land this deer there, and we go, here you go. They say, well done, boys. And the whole time we're looking up and we're watching these vultures fly backwards and forwards over the mountains that you and I are hiking up, going, oh my goodness, wouldn't that be fantastic? And we love them so much, we deified them. We turned them into gods. We started to worship them, right? And we always wanted to be like them. And then we had some crazy guys make some wings, and they started to jump off hills. And then a couple of brothers who were bicycle mechanics in your country thought they could get some dead seagulls from the beach and make some wind tunnels, and then they did it, right? But the whole time, none of us over the bulk of history, no one was thinking about standing in the rear bar of the A380 sipping on champagne, traveling at Mach 0.9 around the planet. That's not what we were doing. We were looking up at the vultures going, I just want to be able to do what they can do. And paragliding is that. And we are so lucky to be alive now. I mean, Wilbur and Orville and every other great aviator that has lived before us would die to be able to walk up a hill with a 10-meter wing on their back and jump off and go for a flight. They would give their lives for it, right? And we happen to be alive at a time when the technology...
Many people did. Getting us to this point.
We happen to be alive where we can do that. And I don't lose sight of that on any day that I go flying. It is, it's something that I really treasure, and that's where I get my motivation from. Is just a deep appreciation for how unique this time is in the history of man, where we can be like a bird.
Very well said. This period you had this last year, when you had the 2 flights where you went, not sure this is for me. Talk about pressure. I mean, in one way, you've given yourself this incredible gift of a year, but it's also, there's some pressure there. You were signing up, you're trying to make the X-Alps, you're trying to get in the biggest thing there is in this sport, in my opinion, in any sport. I mean, it is the sweetest race there is. Were there times this year, maybe in Brazil, you're exhausted, where you're going, "Am I chasing the right thing?" Has there been any
Yeah,
doubt?
Brazil was when the first time I questioned it after
Hmm.
2 years of almost full time training. So, I mean, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I've got businesses in 4 different countries around the planet that I try to run, and then I fly. Yeah, so I'm busy. Um, I was pushing, and the other thing I think, well, not to lose sight of, is I was pushing on the ground as well. So I was doing ultra marathons and stuff. So I'm doing all the physical training on top of all the flight training with PAL. So, but I've got a really good level of, like, I bring it back to that grit. And there's an excellent book by Angela Duckworth that I would recommend to anyone that's listening that wants to know how to develop their grit. It's a really great study that she did on how to develop it in your children and then how to all the way through to yourself. Um, and I have a very high level, like I don't jump into anything unless I really want to do it. And then when I really want to do it, I'm almost ridiculous about how I approach it. Um, so that grit did me very well throughout the couple of years training with Paul and Pal. And I'd say right up to the end there in Brazil, where that was, I mean, Brazil is exhausting in a different way because if you're doing a long flight, the roads are terrible, and you've got to land and get back, and you're driving through the night, and you're getting back at 2, 3 in the morning, a couple of hours sleep, getting up again, 6 o'clock in the morning, you're setting up. 7, we launched every day before 7 and got away this year, which was phenomenal. That was our goal. Was we did a big statistical analysis of every flight over 500 on X contest, and in that statistical analysis, we knew the start window we needed to achieve, we needed the end window, we needed the average. So we were pushing that every day, and that was a really good achievement this year. As we're always first off, everyone's standing around. Is it working? Is it working? We're always bang bang off and go. So we had some really good early starts this year, but that can be very exhausting. Backing that up day after day and keeping your mind fresh enough where you're responsive enough on the wing if something is to go wrong. And the thermals in Brazil, from my experience, and I've done 4 weeks of flying down there at different times of the year. They're soft thermals, they're tropical soft thermals. But this year we noticed it was chopped. It was some rough days there. We hadn't, and that was the wind was coming in and chopping them, and so that was a little bit. We were. It wasn't as easy as the previous trips we had done, um, but I think that was the first time I started to feel exhausted. By that stage, I'd done over 2 years of nearly, like 40-hour weeks of training. I'd say on top of my
Hmm.
job. On top of my job, so that's why I got grey hair.
Phenomenal, man. That's so. And what's the result of that? I mean,
Where am I at now?
I mean, are you fired back up? Are you going to keep chasing it like that? Where do you go from here?
Well, I just got back from the 2 weeks of racing the Enzo down in Australia, and oh man, I'm in love with this new wing. Like, I mean, talk about a step change. That thing's freaking phenomenal. So yeah, it's sort of rekindled my. I mean, I took a good break. I took a month off after Brazil, and I didn't fly for a month. I just had to really um, let the brain recover. I'd been pushing, like you said. Do you ever get tired? I'd say it was probably chronic, but I was doing a really good job of managing it, and I've had a lot of experience doing that. But I gave it a good month off, and then I started getting back into it. Set the schedule for this year. So this year looks like I got a PWC wildcard to Spain, which I'm really excited about. That'll be my next race. That'll be on the Enzo. Uh, I've got the board air races, so I'll race all 3 of those in Austria, the 3 hike and flies. I'll head across to Brazil for the Transcapajaba. I got 4th there in 23, and I wasn't racing well. Like I said, I hadn't done the Pal Tuckout's crazy year, so I'm looking forward to going back there. I love Brazil, love the people, and that's a really cool race. That one, great community down there, best hike and flight community I think in the world. The Brazilians, they're just mad for it. I love them.
Yeah. So, Serge, I know that you're one of your big goals with working with Pal and also working with Paul The last time I saw you supporting him was getting in this race that's starting here in a couple months, the 2025 Red Bull X Alps. That didn't happen. Was that a big hit mentally? Piss you off? What and 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 how did you handle it?
No, look, I think we were pretty well prepared for that. I mean, we knew we'd set a big goal, and I also had prepared a good backup, and that was something I learnt back in the military. So I think there's probably a good little discussion there on the midlife crisis and how that's um, probably inappropriately coined. So the midlife crisis is typically, the Western male is raised to provide for the family. He gets to about the middle of his life, and that has been achieved. His children are leaving home, they've been paid for, the house has been paid for. And at that time in his subconscious, the analogy there is that he has finally got to his summit. So if you imagine you've been hauling your ass up a month of acclimatization to get to the top of Everest, you get to the top, magnificent view, but at the subconscious level of the male mind, it looks down in every direction. And at the end of that descent, it sees its own mortality for the first time. And so the young man who's fearless, reckless, can never hurt himself, can do every dangerous sport, the subconscious realizes it's coming to an end, and now it reels back and can rebel. And in that rebellion, it takes many forms, but I think in the most sort of cliched version of the midlife crisis is a guy who trades in for a younger model wife, dyes the hair, starts dressing crazy, he's night clubbing at 50, etc., etc. Now, I said to you it's inappropriately named, and that's because it's not really hedged to an age in life, it's hedged to an accomplishment in life. And depending on how your life transpires, that can be earlier or later than midlife. So for me, it was around 27. I had the Top Gun sitting there as my summit. It was my Mount Everest since I was a teenager. Worked my ring bit off, got there, got out the other side, and nothing could compete with it. So I had a big fall from there. So that was quite hard to pick myself up again. And I learned a really important lesson, and that lesson has been learnt by many high performers. Another one that comes to mind is Leighton Hewitt, who was Australia's tennis champ. He was 21 when he won the world championship and never recovered. He'd had that thing on his mind since he was a little tacker. He got there, fantastic, and there was nothing beyond that. So I learned a really good lesson there quite early on at 27. When I have big goals, and I've always got something going, whether it's my business or my sports or uh, investments and things like that, whatever it is I'm working on, I always make sure I've got a summit and I'm 100% focused on achieving that summit, but I never allow it to be the only summit. So I actually call it endless summits. So sort of bouncing from goal to goal through life, and sometimes you fall short of them. So definitely X Alps was falling short. Um, However, it wasn't entirely unexpected. It was almost a ridiculous goal that Pal and I set, and I was extremely proud of what we achieved, and with Paul in those couple of years. So the backup plan for me is PwC. I'm going to give myself a go at that, and I'm really stoked about that actually because I'm loving the Enzo, and being at that level, it is next level. I have no real expectations going into PwC. I'm probably going to get an absolute spanking. But in a way, I'm really looking for that because I'm looking for that, what's that next huge challenge that I can really sink my teeth into. So I'm going to see how that goes, see what the vibe is like in the competition. I've heard mixed impressions of what that circuit is like. I found the SRS tremendous in terms of camaraderie and support and things like that. So I will say it's going to have pretty big shoes for the PwC to step into in terms of that. But the competition is next level, and I also understand the psychology is different at that level, and I've raced at that level in other sports. So, I'm not delusional there, but I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm not turning my back on hike and fly. I'm still really fit. I'm still, December I got 1,000 meters a day up the mountain for a month, and I can still do pretty well physically. So while I've still got that physical ability, particularly at my age, I don't want to lose that. And now my flying has got to a much better level. I'm really looking forward to the 2025 hike and fly season as well. I think I've got 2 races in France, 3 in Austria, and Transcapixaba in Brazil are on the menu for this year.
People often ask me, Gavin, how do you do all this cool stuff and maintain any other semblance of life? Now I have to ask it with you. You said, earlier on in the show, you're married, you've got 4 different businesses, you've got a daughter, you're a dad. Uh, are they just screaming at you to come home more, or how are you pulling all this off? Because you're spending a lot of time away.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And we started this podcast with me talking about grit and finding what it is that gives you, meaning and purpose and drive. And so I think my girls, they're 17 and 19, my daughters, and my wife have a very clear understanding, and I've made it clear to them, and they know me well enough by now, of what makes me tick. So they saw me sitting on the couch during COVID, locked in my house, locked out of my country for two
And they're
years,
like, okay,
ready
go,
ready to
get out of here.
yeah. So I got a one-way flight to France, and I did what is normally a 2 to 4 year program to do the mini transat. I knocked that off in 11 months and raced the mini transat. So it was a bit of a record set over there at the time too. And and they know that I need that. And when I return from these things, whether it's big goals of work or sport, I come back with a renewed energy about me that makes me a better husband, makes me a better dad and things like that. So it's a bit of a trade off. I think they would prefer to see me 50% of the time, absolutely thriving and pumping and pushing the family in great directions than to have me around for 100% of the time and somewhat miserable and bored and things like that. So they understand it's an investment in the collective time. My daughter's coming home tomorrow of her own volition. She's just really homesickness as a dad. And I've taken the weekend off. The Dubai Cup's on, but I'm not going because we're going to have a great weekend together. So we have a good agreement. And I think it's a really important point that I talk to a lot of my younger mates about is I think the biggest decision we make in life, it's not the career you choose, uh, it's the partner that you choose. And I have an amazing wife who, for example, loves hike and fly more than I do because she's my supporter. She takes her dog, she drives the van, and just she can't get enough of it driving around Europe and supporting me. And I think having a partner like that it's not just supporting, it's actually motivating. She's totally invested in my outcomes. She follows me on the tracker wherever I am. She's my greatest supporter, as I am to her. She's into competitive sport herself. She's putting herself through another education program, etc. at the moment. So it's we're very mutually supportive in each other's endeavours and goals. And I make that point, really strongly to my younger friends who are in the dating game and things like that is, find someone that makes you the best version of yourself and settle for no one less.
I was back in my sailing days, so this must have been. I was living in Fremantle in Australia, just south of Perth, with this guy and my girlfriend, and it was we were really broke. It was a hard section of that whole, going around the world for that was the first time. And every time when I go into the bathroom and take a leak, there was a sign up above the toilet that said, and this is a little dated, it would say it differently, a little bit different now, but it was top 10 things for I can't, a joyful life, happy life. They have these lists, and the number one was marry the right person. This one decision alone will determine 90% of your happiness or misery. And I think that's pretty accurate. It matters a lot. That's a big one.
And I had a pretty rough road in my 20s to get to where I've got to. So I had some, difficult times on the relationship side, but, I came from a family. I didn't have the best model of what relationships look like. So there was some pretty good trial and errors and things going on in my 20s, and I'm very thankful what I have with my wife and what we've created, and that's very much a part of what allows me to dedicate myself to my work, my sports, whatever endeavors I've got is a partner who's fully invested in those outcomes. So rather than I've got other friends who are like, they're gritting their teeth. Missus are pissed off with them because they're away from home and yada, yada, yada. And I feel terribly sorry for them. I've got a missus who's saying, hey, hun, get over that, you got over that psychological fear. Your SIV's going well. Just get your head into it. You can do it, and she's really in tune with how I'm going, very invested. And it really is the best decision you can make is find someone who makes you better than you can be alone.
Serge, we're up against our time limit a little bit, but you are a listener of the show. You've heard me ask this question many times with others, but with you, I'm really interested in asking this question because you have done so much with your life. But if you could rewind the clock to your 50-hour self, and I think this should not be paragliding, this should be aviation. So back in your teens somewhere, if you got to just magically take yourself from right now at your age in Austria and go back and talk to that little wing nut, what would you tell him? Knowing what you know now.
Milk every bit out of it that you can. I think, I was racing through life pretty fast, as we discussed, Gavin, and I had an amazing career in uniform and out of uniform. And a lot of it flashed by where, I was taking it for granted. I was getting up in the morning as a 21-year-old, flying 3 hops a day in an amazing piece of machinery, and longing for the day to end so I could jump off the cliff in my hang glider. And so I probably would have told myself to just sort of slow down a bit and smell the roses and enjoy it along the way. Probably be the best advice I'd give my younger self.
Yeah, time doesn't slow down as we age, does it?
No, it accelerates rapidly.
Sure does.
Rapidly accelerates.
Serge, you're a treat, man. I appreciate it. We've needed to do this for a long time. I think the stars aligned in a really good way. We hit you at a good time. This was a lovely chat, and can't wait to see what you do with the next few years. And I'm excited to go racing with you in Spain, man. I'll be seeing you soon. Your first World Cup, and I've done a whole lot of these, so maybe I can share some knowledge with you.
It will be good to catch. It will be good to catch up, mate. And I've got to thank you for what you've done. When I started into paragliding, I made an effort of listening to every single podcast that had anything to do with paragliding. And one of those, I believed, had a lot to do with saving my life. I got myself very early on in my paragliding career, got myself into a very strong valley wind and a very narrow pass where I was doing 85 kilometres an hour downwind on a B wing at about 50 metres off the ground. Turned into wing, my speed bar broke. So I'm going backwards at around 50 kilometres an hour. And I looked backwards because I could see I was going to impact a long way down range, and there was a set of high-tension power lines. And I just listened to one of your podcasts with, I think it was Cedar.
If it's high-tension power lines, it was with Cedar. He was pretty new. I just listened to that one, and I told you I had a good mate in Australia who blew his arms and legs off hitting them. So I made a really good decision there, which was still kilometres upwind, was to run downwind. And I only just cleared the pole and then spin it essentially over the top because there was another set, another 10 kilometres down valley. And that really had a lot to do with getting me out of a really difficult situation, which was likely to end up in those lines. So, what you do for everyone and including myself, I have really benefited from Cloudbase. So thanks for what you do. I appreciate it, man. That's a good story. You had told me that one. That was good to remember that one.
I think I sent you a subscription after that one because I felt like that was well and truly worth a subscription. That piece of information.
Well, I appreciate it, and thanks for your support, of course. But more importantly, thanks for sharing these great stories and your incredible dedication. I think many people, including myself, are going to find it really inspiring. But thanks, man. Good talking to you.
You too, buddy. See you, mate.
Cheers. If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So For example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account, and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.